We're doing a presentation on herbs, and I know a lot of you that signed up for the class have received pots and seeds, and we'll demonstrate how to plant that at the end of this. The After the presentation, then we'll do a demonstration. So let's get started. Next slide. There we go. Okay. So hello, everybody. Glad to see you here on this first day of spring. At least today it looks like spring and seems like spring. So we're going to do a demonstration here on herb gardening. This is sponsored to U of M Master Gardener Volunteer Program. We took all the classes, and we've been Master Gardeners a couple years. Pam a little longer than me. She's about 5 years. I'm going on my third. It's really a fun thing. It's a little bit of work, but it's a lot of fun doing it. So let's get started. Next slide. So this is all the priorities of the Master Gardener program. Things like the horticultural skills, plant biodiversity, pollinators, which are really important, clean water, local food, which is really good, and try not to contribute to climate change too much, and nature. It's all about nature. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so what are herbs? A plant or plant part valued for its medicinal, savory, or aromatic qualities. Pronunciation guide. In England and the UK, the H is pronounced herb. In America, the H is silent. Herb. Next slide. Why do herbs taste good? Essential oils. Generated naturally as part of the growth in all parts of the plant. It also repels pests. It attracts pollinators and other beneficial insects. Next slide. So then there's fine and robust herbs. Strength of flavor. Fine, mild herbs are basil, dill, chives, cilantro, fennel, mint, oregano, parsley. And the robust herbs are rosemary, sage, and thyme. Next slide, please. So herbs and spices. Similarities, both are obtained from plants. Both add flavor and aroma to food. Both are best fresh, but store well. The differences, herbs equals the leaves, spices equals everything else. Roots, flowers, fruits, seeds, or bark. Next slide. Common herb families, the mint family. Basil, catnip, lavender, mint, oregano, rosemary, sage, and thyme. The carrot family, chervil, cilantro, dill, fennel, lovage, parsley. Next slide. Next slide.
Actually, Joe, I just wanted to ask you to, if you could talk, can you speak up a little bit?
Sure, okay. Okay, so can you hear me better now? Okay, the mint family characteristics. Characteristics, small shrub shape, square stems, small bulbate tulip flowers, flowers that do not affect leaf flavor. Mint are herbs, valuable for leaves, tolerates excessive heat and dry soil. Next slide. Okay, the carrot family characteristics, upright and leggy habit, furrowed and U-shaped stems, flat umbrella-like flower clusters, deep taproot, which is really important when you're planting. Carrots as herbs, valuable for leaves and seeds. Prefer regular watering with deeper and looser soil. Next slide. Growing herbs. Next slide. Choosing plants, consideration. How much sun do you get? What do you like eating? How much do you need? Recommendations. Grow from seed indoors, February, March, or purchase transplants, May to June. Choose unique flavor varieties. Consider hard to find herbs. Next slide. Growing requirements. Ample sunlight. Full sun, 8+ hours a day. Part sun, 4 to 6 hours a day. Regular water. Use clean, potable water. Water deeply when needed. Healthy soil. Loose texture with organic matter. Minimal additional fertilizer required. Next slide. Care and maintenance. Apply mulch around the plant, especially when it's hot and dry. Remove damaged stems and yellow leaves. Water in the morning. Maintenance. Pinch, mint family, herbs to encourage bushy growth. Remove flowers prior to blooming. Harvest regularly. Next slide. Pinch demonstration. We're going to do that at the end, but we'll show you how we we prune basil plants. It's really important and it makes them bushier and it really does make them grow much better. Next slide. Pests and problems. Few pests bother herbs. Cutworms, young plants, mostly if it's in the ground. If it's in a pot, you don't have to worry. Aphids, spider mites in the hot weather, rust and mildew fungi on mint family herbs. Identify the source of the problem and use integrated pest management practices. Next slide. Harvesting. Harvest mid-morning. Use clean hands, tools, and containers. Mint family herbs. Harvest from the top down. Cut stems to another set of leaves. Leave at least 4 inches. I guess I'd also say maybe you don't want to cut more than 25% of the plant at a time. The carrot family herbs. Harvest from outside in. Cut stems to the base of the plant. Cut less than 1/3 of the stems. Next slide. Using culinary herbs. Next slide. Using culinary herbs. When it comes to fresh, you can use it as garnish, salads, seasonings, sauces and purees, soups, teas, and cocktails. Next slide. Dried. You can use it for seasonings, for teas and cocktails. Next slide. Frozen. For sauces and purees, soups and stews. Next slide. Cooking with herbs. Flavor. Cut or bruise leaves to release flavor. Dry herbs are stronger than fresh herbs. Ground herbs work faster than whole herbs. Cooking methods. Raw recipes. Add herbs and rest for 1 to 2 hours. Fast recipes. Add herbs at the end. Guess an example of that is if you're making a pizza, you don't add the basil till like the last 2 minutes of cooking, otherwise it burns. But if you do it that way, it's just perfect. Slow recipes. Add hearty herbs at the start and remove before serving. Substitutions. 3 units fresh equals 1 unit dried. 1 unit whole equals 1/4 unit ground. Next slide. Short-term storage. Fresh, tender herbs. Tender herbs have soft stems and the leaves bruise easily. For example, basil, cilantro, dill, mint, and parsley. Good for 5 to 7 days. The steps you take are trim the stem ends and put in a jar of water, like a vase of flowers. Use within 1 day, leave on the counter. Using within 1 week, cover with a plastic bag and store in the refrigerator, except do not store basil in the refrigerator. It just doesn't work that way. It doesn't keep well that way. Next slide. Short-term storage, fresh, hardy herbs. Hardy herbs have woody stems and sturdy leaves. Chives, oregano, rosemary, sage, and thyme. Good for 5 to 14 days. The steps: you wrap in a damp paper towel, put wrapped herbs in plastic zip top bag, store in the refrigerator. Next slide. Long-term storage, drying herbs. Good for 1 to 3 years. Store dried herbs in dark, cool, and dry place. Drying methods: hang in bunches, use a dehydrator, use the oven, or use the microwave. Next slide. Long-term storage, freezing herbs, good for 6 months to 1 year. Add to cooked recipes. The steps: freeze individual leaves on a sheet pan and store frozen leaves, or chop the herbs and freeze in ice cube trays, optional. Top with water or olive oil. Store frozen herbs in zip top baggies. Next slide. Common culinary herbs. Next slide. Basil. The origin is from Southeast Asia and India. It's a category, it's in the mint family, annual, tender, fine. Very tender as far as the weather. You never want to have it out when any night is even close to freezing because it won't survive. Culinary uses: Mediterranean food, sweet basil; Thai and Indian food, Asian basil. Lots of flavor, shape, and color varieties. Lemon ruffled red. Benefits from aggressive pinching, which is what we're going to do later on here. May be susceptible to powdery mildew. There are 2 kinds of basil: sweet Genovese basil and Asian basil. Next slide. Chives. Origin Europe and Asia. Category onion family, perennial in Minnesota, hardy, robust. It does overwinter too. You can plant it and you can't kill it. It spreads like wildfire. It's very invasive. You can start with a pot and end up with a whole lot. Culinary uses: garnish, food, fresh salads. Comments: multiple flavor options available. Garlic chives, which are really good too. Flowers are edible. Reseed somewhat aggressively. Can also propagate through divisions. Next slide. Cilantro. The origin is Southern Europe and the Middle East. Categories: carrot family, annual, tender, and fine. Culinary uses: Latin America, Southeast Asian. Sometimes called Chinese parsley. Bolts flowers in hot weather. The seeds are called coriander and are used in Indian cooking. May taste soapy to some people. Next slide. Mint. Origin: Middle East and North Africa. In the mint family. Perennial. Some in Minnesota. Hardy and fine. Culinary uses: Mid-Eastern, Greek, Southeast Asia, Indian. Fresh salads, teas, and jellies. Comments: more than 35 flavor varieties. Can be invasive. Grow in pots. It does spread, it really does. Propagate through cuttings or root divisions. Can be overwintered indoors. And I have grown it over winter for 2-3 years, so it can easily be done. Next slide. Oregano. Origin: Mediterranean. Categories: the mint family, perennial, hardy, and fine. Culinary uses: Mediterranean, Latin American. Comments: can be invasive, grow in pots, propagate through cuttings or root divisions, can be overwintered indoors. Best used dried. Sweet marjoram, origin North America, is similar to oregano but has a milder flavor. Next slide. Parsley. Origin: Southern Europe. Categories: carrot family, biennial, tender, fine. Culinary uses: French, Cajun, garnish sauces, fresh salads, tea. Comments: eating raw parsley after a meal has been thought to help control bad breath. There are 2 kinds of parsley: flat leaf parsley for cooking and curly parsley for garnish. Next slide. Rosemary Origins, Spain and the Mediterranean. Category, the mint family. Perennial, hardy, robust. Culinary uses, Italian, French, often paired with meats. Soups, stews, sauces, long cooking time. So if you're cooking a long time, that's a good time for rosemary. Comments, used sparingly, strong taste. Can be overwintered indoors, and I have had plants for 2-3 years. Propagate through cuttings or root divisions. Next slide. Sage, origin, Mediterranean, Syria. Categories, mint family, perennial, hardy, robust. Culinary uses, Italian, Mid-Eastern, British, American, Thanksgiving stuffing, butter sauce, potatoes, beans. Comments, use sparingly, strong taste. Can be overwintered indoors, and I have done that. Or ornamental sage, salvia, should not be used as culinary sage. Sage brushes and sage worts, artemisia, should not be used as culinary sage. Next slide. Time. Origin, Mediterranean. Categories, mint family, perennial, hardy, robust. Culinary uses, Mediterranean, Italian, French, American, often paired with meat, poultry, fish, and vegetables. Works well with long cooking times. Comments, over 400 varieties of thyme, only some of which are used for culinary. Can be overwintered indoors, propagate through cuttings or root divisions. Next slide. Other culinary herbs. For the leaves, it's bay, like a bay leaf, chervil, dill, fennel, lemongrass, marjoram, stevia, tarragon. Stevia I've actually grown for like 3-4 years overwintering indoors. Flowers, borage, chamomile, lavender, nasturtiums, roses, violets. Next slide. If you want to learn more, you can download a copy of today's slides from the Ramsey County Master Gardener website. That's the website there. If you enjoyed this class, we hope you join for another. You can also find our schedule of upcoming events online. And Washington County also has things like that too. Where did that go? Their website isn't up right now. That little, anyway, don't worry about it. We'll find it later. Okay, next slide. Thank you very much. It's been fun doing this presentation, and now we'll do the demonstration. Okay. The website on Washington County Master Gardeners is not up yet, but I think you can go to www.mastergardenersinwashingtoncounty.org. I would try it next week because it's not up yet, but I think it will be up in the coming week, and we'll let the library know if it's a different website and get back to them, and we'll get you more information. So on to the demonstration. So I know everybody that signed up for the class got pots and seeds when you registered for the class. So now we're going to show you what to do with the pots and the seeds. So let me do this fast. Okay, here's the 3 kinds of seeds that you got. You've got curled parsley, and we've got flat leaf parsley, which is the kind that you use for cooking. And we also have sweet basil. It doesn't matter so much with this, most of the time with the seeds, whether you buy the more expensive seeds or the cheaper seeds. But when it comes to the soil, that's important. You don't want to buy, okay, I get the really cheap soil. Well, you'll have not good results. I've learned that myself. I mean, I grow a lot of plants over the winter. But what I found is quality, you get a good quality potting soil. Start with that. You can buy a bag for probably $10 or so, and you can grow an awful lot with that. Let alone if you have pots, you can use it in your pots too. So what we do then is we plant some seeds.
The soil is real light and fluffy also, just so
Yeah.
you know.
You try not to, if there's branches or not branches, twigs or anything on there, you try and take that out because it's going to be hard for the seeds to germinate with that. As long as you do that, what you do then is you open up the packet and take out a few seeds. And you don't need too many seeds. I mean, I plant maybe 7, 8 seeds. So this is the pot. How can I do that? Yeah, why don't you hold it? That's a good
Okay.
idea. So what we do, we take the seeds and we drop them in there one by one. And you don't cover it with much dirt, just a little tiny bit. And you can use a fork or a spoon, something like that, just to get them down just a little bit. And then the first thing you do after that is once you get them in there, you don't want to use watering can or anything like that. You just spray them with a little mist of water. Just a little tiny bit. Just enough to get it moist. And then you find, you get them in a sunny place. It depends on the herbs, but for basil, for example, you can get them in a sunny place where it's going to get fairly warm in the dirt. And once you do that, they'll probably in about 2 weeks or so, they'll grow. And here's the proof. This is about 3 weeks ago, these were planted. And I have 15 of these all together, the combination of the three of the sweet basil, the flat parsley, and the curl parsley. And they're going to be available first come, first serve at the Stillwater Library this afternoon. So if you're interested, here's some that are already started. But especially with basil, you don't want to have it out till the nights are probably close to 40. Because even if it's close to freezing, they really suffer. You can set them back, or if it gets too cold, it kills them. I've learned that time and again in the fall. It's like, oh, it's not that cold. Well, it doesn't take much for that. But something like parsley, it doesn't matter so much. They can handle a little bit of freezing once they're full grown. So that was the basil. Here is an example of a curl parsley after about 3 weeks. It's just coming up. So that you can probably plant in mid-May, whereas the basil, you probably want to wait till the end of May. Now, where's the other one? The other one is flat right there. And here's an example of the flat parsley. And as you can see, it's just little now, but they grow pretty quick. And I think, especially the basil, you could even grow inside. You wouldn't even have to take it outside. And I know that because in December, at one of the grocery stores, they had this. They just had plants a little bit bigger than what you see in the pots. And 3 months later, this is what you have. So it really doesn't take much. And this was just grown inside, basically. I mean, other than they were probably about, maybe 3 inches tall when I planted them. And what happened was when I bought them, it turned out, I thought it was one plant. Well, it was about a dozen plants. So I was surprised. I waited a week to find out, I should have transplanted them. But I learned in time, and we still got a whole bunch of basil. We've cut it since, and we're going to cut it again.
One thing I was going to mention about when you do start your plants in the pots that you picked up is make sure that you do label them. And it's really important because if you don't, you all of a sudden have all of these containers and wonder which one I put in which. So Joe had done a really nice job about just putting in the name here as sweet basil and then covering it with plastic, because if it gets moisture to it, it also, you can lose the printing.
Now, label will fall off
It's
too.
so, yeah, it's so important. And then also he has a little popsicle stick that he also puts in it. So just double check and just make sure that you really mark your pots. Okay, now on to trimming or showing how we trim out and,
No, we need those first. First, we're going to show you what you do is when you plant them. Something like basil, you can maybe get away with this, is about a 5-6 inch pot, because the basil is a member of the mint family, so it doesn't have as deep a root. But now, let's see, how can I explain? When you get to things like parsley, that's in the carrot family. And because it's the carrot family, what happens is you'll find that the roots are really, really deep. So I would suggest at least this deeper one. This is probably about 10 inches deep. But what's probably even better, if you can do it, is about a 12-inch deep pot. Because I've grown them and I actually have roots coming out of the bottom of even this. If you're going to just grow it outside, you could even just take a 5-gallon pail, which you'll need a lot of dirt, but you do it that way. Make sure, and also always make sure you have a hole of some kind in the bottom. You don't want just to water it and just the moisture builds up in the dirt, because then the roots and the seeds will rot. They just don't make it that way. You always have to have some way for the water to drain. And then when you do water your plants, when they're bigger, you don't want to water them till it seems at least dry on the surface. And it does depend on the herb. Different herbs are different that way. I have some notes about all the different ones, because some of them like it dry. Like, for example, rosemary. You don't want to water that too much. But parsley, they love water. You can water them plenty, and they're fine. Probably because of the taproot too, because that there's a lot of root to feed with the water. So that's the idea of the pots. So now we're going to do a demonstration of how you trim the parsley. Let's do that one.
okay.
So you actually can, because of the basil, because basil is not as deep a root, you can actually grow 3 of them in there with a bigger pot. So what you want to do is, like I said, no more than 20, you can do it, that's fine. No more than 25%, but you could probably cut down probably about 3-4 inches like that, and just cut everything above that, right there where my finger is. Yep.
Right.
Go ahead.
And you want to do it right at that leaf section area.
True. You can actually see where I did it here before. And all that grew around it since. So it does really grow up.
Ooh, and it smells so good too.
Yep. And you can easily dry that too. Because fresh, it's pretty strong. But you can dry it, and you can even, after you dry it good, then you can just crunch it up and make the ground stuff so that you can use it in your cooking a lot and things like that. Really works well that way. Okay, so what else do we have here?
The only other thing I remember we were going to talk about is the difference between how you do trim between the carrot family and the mint family to keep the bushiness.
Okay.
Anything else with that?
Well, carrot family.
I guess that was more with the root, that we wanted to
Right.
make sure you knew that you had to make sure that you keep a pot that's deep.
Oh yeah, you think parsley. Well, you can grow it in a little pot, but you'll see that there's a big difference between if you grow it in a little pot, or if you put it in a big pot, or if you grow it in the ground. There's a huge difference in how that works and what you're going to get in the long run.
That's it.
So
Any questions?
we got questions. Let's start with that.
Yeah, there's one question in the chat waiting, asking at what point do you transplant them into that pot?
Okay. Probably when they're about, I'd say 3-4 inches. I guess another thing too is, in the case of this basil, there's more than one plant in there, and eventually you're just gonna want to make it one. But when you plant the seeds, just to make sure you get them, you plant more than one seed. But at about 4 inches, you want to transplant it. You could transplant it more than once. They're pretty easy to transplant that. Now parsley is a little different because it has a deep root. So when you transplant that, you probably want to put it in the pot you're going to leave it in, because it doesn't like to be transplanted over and over. I don't know if you've ever seen a sunflower, but when you grow a sunflower, that has a deep tap root. And if you grow it in the ground and you think, oh, I'm going to move that, well, it's pretty hard to do without losing the plant. So if you do it early and get it to its final location, it works a lot better. So I think that answers that question. Next question.
So that was the only one in the chat. Anybody is welcome to unmute and ask questions at this point, or if you don't want to do that, you can go ahead and type them in. Here's another one. How wet should our little pots be?
How wet?
Right,
Um,
like how much water?
just moist in the beginning. And like we were showing, just use a spray bottle where you just get a little bit of moisture in there. Because if you start pouring water in there, you're probably going to get mildew and the seeds won't germinate. It has to be just moist enough so that it kind of loosens up the seed, and between the sun and the moisture, that makes it germinate. I think that answers that question.
Also, when you put your finger into the dirt, you don't want it to be too wet. You just want it to be so that you can feel the moisture.
Yeah.
Great. The next question, is there any differences in planting in a pot versus a raised bed?
A pot versus a raised bed. Not really too much, other than in a raised bed, it'll probably get bigger. It's more a space thing. I mean, if you only have so much room, a pot works really good. You can grow almost anything in a pot, which I've found out in the last couple of years. I always thought, well, tomatoes, peppers, the obvious things. But I've grown carrots in pot. I've grown lettuce. I think you can grow spinach. You can probably grow anything. Maybe not peas so much, but beans you could certainly grow in a pot. And last year in the Washington County Fairgrounds, we even grew acorn squash in a big pot, and they really turned out good. The vine still grew probably 5, 6, 7 feet, but it produced just like it was in the ground.
The one nice part about pots is that you do have more of a chance that you can move them around. And at the end of the growing season, you can bring them in if it's still looking good.
The only disadvantage of a pot is, unlike the ground, you have to really keep an eye on it.
Yeah.
If you don't water it within a couple days, a lot of times things will wilt, and then that's really a lot of stress on the plant. But as far as space and using it over and over, it really works good that way. Next question.
Next one, how do you deal with buggy plants from the store?
Buggy plants?
Yeah, if you picked one up at the store and it had insects on it or aphids or something.
Well, I guess you start by trying to pick them all off. That really works well. A lot of times, depending on what kind of insect, you can probably take a spray bottle and spray with water, or maybe even something like vinegar or something that maybe those pests don't like. That might make them go away too. Any other ideas?
The only other one that comes to my mind is the preen oil or neem oil, NEEM. It will not hurt your plants at all, but it will take care of some of the some of those bugs that you just kind of say you don't want, and then just keep it outside if possible.
Yeah, when it comes to anything that you're going to eat, you have to be really careful about what you use. You don't want to use chemicals that, might get into the plant, and then you eat what's on the plant or the fruit from the plant, and then that gets in your system. You don't want that. So that's really important that you try and use, more natural things. I mean, like in the case, it's not a plant, but in the case of deer, you spray something that smells like rotten eggs and they don't come anywhere near it, but it doesn't hurt anything and it goes away. It's pretty much natural. And the same thing goes for, you can use, what was it? Raspberries. I can't think of the name of that, but something that smelled really disgusting, but it got rid of all the pests and it didn't hurt the plant, and you could still clean off the fruit and eat it. So that was really important. Next question.
How about your thoughts on using grow lights?
Well, I think they're good. I haven't always, I've never used them myself, but I'm probably the exception to the rule. I mean, a lot of times they talk about grow lights and a southern exposure, that kind of thing, and that does work really well. I have grown plants in an eastern exposure, which sounds really weird, but it works. I've grown plants for the master gardeners, probably 100 or 200 plants, tomato plants, peppers, herbs, all those kind of things.
Maybe mention about the heating pad.
Oh, but a really good thing that she's talking about is the heat mats, especially things like peppers, celery, anything that really has to have really, really warm soil. It really works well to buy one of the heat mats. They're about $25, $30. They're well worth it because they last for years and years. And like, for example, with my pepper seeds, what I do is I take a big quart Ziploc bag. I take the seeds, I get a paper towel, get really warm water, put the seeds on the paper towel, and then put it in the Ziploc bag, and then put it on the heat mat for about 10 days. And in those 10 days, those seeds are germinating. I can put it in the dirt, plant them, and most of them come up. And I also use, we have like a heater for our bathroom, and that works really good, where you can make the whole place really warm, and that really helps them to germinate. Most seeds aren't like that, but things like peppers, celery, they have to have really, really warm soil to germinate. So that's kind of what I've seen. Anything to add?
No, I think that's what I found too, as far as the lights. It seems like you can just boost the starting period of the seeds if you have the growing lights in the mat.
And I know a lot of the lights are adjustable, so you can have them close to the seeds in the beginning, and then you move them further away as they get big. And I think that's really important, because then that helps them to grow. Because if you kept them too close, it'd be really hard on them. But if you keep moving them, it just kind of helps them to develop. Next question.
Can you share information on the planting and storage of garlic?
Garlic. Well, let's see. Garlic, first of all, most people don't realize you don't plant it in the spring, you plant it in the fall, in October, just before the ground freezes. And you have it there all winter, and you uncover it in the spring. You cover a little bit of mulch in the winter, and in the spring, you uncover it, and you actually harvest it in July, which sounds different than all the other things, but that's the way that works. And then what you want to do when you dry it is you store it in really a paper bag with some holes in it so it can keep dry, and that keeps it from getting bad or anything. Like onion, it's the same kind of thing as an onion. You put in a paper bag with holes in it so it keeps dry, and you can use it, and it lasts for months that way. Next question.
What's the best way of drying the basil?
Drying the basil. Well, what I've done is I clean the basil, make sure the leaves are clean, because sometimes they have dirt on them, things like that. And if you have any bad leaves, throw them away. They're not going to turn out good anyway. And a lot of times, like even these basil plants that we were growing, there's a few bad ones on the bottom. That doesn't matter, because it's like a tree. It's whatever's coming up at the very top, that's what's important. But when it comes to drying it, I clean it, and then I put it on paper towels, and I dry it that way. You leave it on a paper towel for probably a week, maybe a week and a half, in a dry place. And then you can I think you can actually freeze the leaves, or else you can break it up into little, ground it up, and then you can save it that way, and it'll probably last for a year or two easily that way. And with herbs especially, it's so expensive to go buy them. So if you can grow your own, I mean, all these plants I showed you and more was probably $3, and then whatever the dirt costs and the time to do it. Compared to if you go buy one plant, you're going to pay $3, $4 for an herb plant, which, it'll be closer to maturity, but you can do all that yourself. So why not do it that way? And especially now we're getting closer to spring and summer, and you got something to look forward to. And you're watching that little plant grow bigger and bigger. It's a lot of fun. Next question.
It's asking about the handout. So I think they're saying I printed out the information from the seed packets, and
Okay.
the seed packet from the parsley seeds said to soak for 24 hours before planting. Do you recommend doing that?
I guess you can do that. What I found is if it's the curly parsley, it doesn't matter. But I have heard of just what you're talking about with the flat leaf parsley, the cooking parsley. For some reason, those seeds don't want to germinate. So it probably is good to soak them for 24 hours beforehand. And probably all you really need to do is a wet, warm paper towel, warm water, put it together. I maybe put it in a Ziploc bag too, just so they get more wet that way, more moistened that way. And then take them out after 24 hours. Take a fork or a spoon, get them in the ground, but don't cover them much. Maybe a quarter, maybe even only 1/8 of an inch, because they're really tiny seeds and they have to be close to the surface so they can germinate. So that's what I found.
Mhm. Yeah, I haven't done it, but that sounds right.
Okay, next question.
That's all of the questions I've got so far. Anybody else want to speak up or type anything in?
I just put one in there.
Okay.
So last summer, I have 2 raised beds, and in one of the raised beds, I had cucumbers in it, and I had peppers and tomatoes, and I had a basil plant, and I got these gross bugs. They, if they were exposed to light, they would just kind of curl up. It almost looked like a gray caterpillar, but I don't know exactly what it was. Do you have any idea of what they were and why they came in there and how to get rid of them if they do end up showing their faces again?
No, I guess I'd go online and read about it first of all.
I thought that they were a cutworm when I Googled it.
Oh, really? A cutworm?
That's what I mean, I Googled and Googled and Googled, and I found different pictures that were similar to what it looked like.
How long were they?
About like that.
So what, an inch or two?
About an inch, yeah. Maybe
Okay.
even a little less. And I could pick them out and I put them in a little container
Yeah.
and like a little sour cream container and put the lid on, and they were still alive like weeks later.
Wow.
Huh. When you're watering your tomatoes, make sure that you don't get the moisture on the leaves if you can at all help it.
Yeah,
Just
that's
get it in
really
the dirt.
anything. You don't want to get in the leaves.
So I'm
because-
wondering if that might have been something that, it liked that I would gravitated to that area. That's really different. And I would,
Sorry.
sorry, if it was a cutworm, that it would have taken the stem, it would have cut it.
Well,
Okay.
it eats the leaves
Is
too.
it too? Okay.
I mean, it was a couple years ago, but if it was a cutworm, I couldn't believe it. I had a tomato plant in a pot, and I'm looking and I'm thinking, what's different? That's not the color green. And it was a cutworm. I never seen one on a tomato plant. Always when you plant, for example, tomato plants, or well, especially tomato plants in the garden, in a raised bed like I have too,
Uh-huh.
you want to put either a little stick or a nail or something like that right next to the stem.
Okay.
Because if a cutworms come around, they'll come and cut right off when they're little plants, when they're, young plants. And I wonder if it's the same kind of thing. And I have seen where they'll come and eat all the leaves. It's funny it was on basil, but I suppose that's possible.
Well, it was around, I had 2 different tomato plants, and then, it was 2 different tomatoes, a pepper plant, 2 jalapeno peppers in there, a cucumber, and I had beans in there. Oh, it was all around my beans, my snap peas rather. It was all around my snap peas. And I would dig, and all of a sudden I found these things, and then it was like in the entire thing. And I'm on the Carol Levin Grow Facebook page, and there was a lot of people also commenting how their soil that they got, which came from Menards, which is where I got mine, they were full of it as well.
Well, what kind of soil did you buy from Menards? Was it the cheap stuff?
I can't be sure. My husband bought it for me because it was a present. So he made the beds and he bought the soil and everything. So I'd have to see if he knows, but I know he researched it because he got like the peat moss combo with some other different soils,
Yeah.
because that's what he read.
Yeah, so that should be right. Also, you can always go on to the website umn.edu.
Yep. They have a lot of good information.
Yeah, and you can also take a picture of, you could take a picture of that bug
Okay.
and send it in, because Master Gardeners will then get back to you of what to do, and we'll give you more tips about that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
There is apps that you can, but you maybe have to purchase them, or you can take a picture of that. You'll have it, the app will tell you what that bug is and things like that. But I think there was a cost in that. But you
Sure.
can find out about it that way too.
I started putting some crushed up eggshells around there, hoping that that would deter them or any other bugs that were in the area
Yeah.
around the bottom of the plants, but it didn't really help.
Was it the peas and the basil you're saying, right?
It was the peas for sure. Those were the snap peas were being destroyed.
Uh-huh.
And then everything else just kind of started to seem wilty until I figured out that that's what it was. And then I started pulling them out by hand.
Yeah.
You know, and I got as many as I could find, and I kept checking because I was kind of going crazy about it, that they were in there.
I know what you mean. We had a thing last year. We grew the garden at the Washington County Fairgrounds, and what happened is we had the cabbage bugs, cabbage worms, and it was just infested. But we picked them all, and we worked really hard at picking them, and after that they were gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So picking them is really a good way. It's not easy.
No.
It's hard to find them, but it is a worthwhile thing to do. It really is.
Yeah. They're really gross though. So yeah, but I hear you. Thank you for answering my question.
Well, yeah, like you say, you put them in a, maybe you got to put them, what did you have? Did you have just water in that container? you
Yeah,
had?
I actually put it in water with a little Dawn soap.
That's
Okay.
Dropped them into that, and they.
because the Dawn soap, they can't survive that.
Yes.
Now, whereas water, well, some things survive in water a long time.
Right. Well, I read beer in like a lid because there were slugs around there too, around my,
That works with slugs, yeah.
Mhm.
around, not rutabaga, what's it called? The one that comes in the spring and then rhubarb. I was
Yeah.
told that rhubarb, that will help with rhubarb. It did nothing. No beer helped at all. So,
I haven't had very good luck with that
Rhubarb.
either. I've had the slug problem by my hostas, and I'm actually gonna, my next thing is I'm just gonna go ahead and put like bark, the bigger clumps of bark around it. They say that they don't like sharp edges.
yes, that's why I did the eggshells.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I won't take up any more time. Thank you.
No, that's okay. One last thing with your tomatoes, for example, is it's really important to put mulch, whether it's grass or leaves. Grass is really good, but it doesn't last.
Okay.
Anything that splashes up from the soil, you get all these diseases. It's a
Oh,
big deal.
okay. Well, it was my first year with these raised beds, so I'm learning very slowly, but okay. Thank you.
Better as you put more things to make the soil better,
Yes, definitely.
condition it. Okay, next question.
Okay, there's another question. What's the difference between spearmint and peppermint?
Okay, spearmint and peppermint. Well, spearmint, you've tasted like the spearmint gum. It's kind of a sweet, sugary taste, and it's good. It's really good. Peppermint is more, it's a really sharp taste. Like you think of what's the red and white peppermint? What do you call that?
Oh, like that. Candy cane?
Candy cane. Well, a candy cane or a little, whatever. That's peppermint, and it's a sharper taste. I guess spearmint you can use in things like tea a lot of things. You can use in a salad, all kinds of things. Peppermint is more medicinal. Like if you had a sour stomach, that would be a good time to have peppermint or something like that. I'm sure there's a lot of other uses. I haven't really looked into that. I'm sure if you just Google it and see what it says to use peppermint for, that'd be a good way to go on that. They're both really good, and you can plant them in a pot, and they pretty much overwinter. If you have them in a raised bed, for example. We had them here for 5-6 years. We started with a pot, and they spread 5 to 10 feet across till something else took over. But so they really grow well too. It's just that they're a little bit invasive. I do know a lot more about spearmint than peppermint. Like I say, tea, put them in salads. I don't know. There's a lot of uses. Just to freshen your breath. It's kind of like the parsley idea. Especially if you ate something really garlicky or sour or something like that, kind of freshen up your breath. Peppermint, more for the, I don't know, your stomach, things like that. It's got a sharp taste, but it's really good. So I guess that's all we know on that one. Next question.
Here's a question about the pots, asking whether the pots are ones that can be planted in the dirt.
What's that?
The pots that were provided, whether they can be planted in the dirt. And they were the compostable pots, but I don't know if you have any opinions on whether you'd want to take them out or cut them up, or if they're just fine to leave as is.
All you have to do is you can plant them in the ground. The only difference is when you go to plant it, just take off the very bottom, because it'll all compost, but you want to make sure the roots can get out and spread out. So if you just take the bottom off, just the circle there, take out the whole thing. By the time you do that, it'll grow really good, and you're actually adding something good to the soil at the same time. I have used the other plastic ones like this. They last for years, but they don't recycle very well. So I don't know. If you're going to use them for years, plastic's fine. But if you're going to use them one time, but the only problem with this is try not to get it too wet, too much, because if you get it too wet, then it starts to kind of break down. If you just keep things moist, it'll be good. But if you overwater it, maybe by the time you get it outside, it doesn't matter. But indoors, you don't want the thing to start breaking down and kind of spreading all over the place. But as far as putting them in the ground and that, they're really great. So I think that answers that question. Any other questions?
Next question, is it okay to plant several different types in the same large pot?
Well, as long as you have a large enough pot, and you have to keep in mind the carrot and the mint family. Like if you had a really big pot like this, which is probably about 10 inches, you could probably plant a variety of things. It has to be a pretty good circumference, probably about the same width across as height, so 10, 12 inches. You probably want something like parsley in the middle, because that has like a taproot. It's going to go real deep. But if you had like basil on the sides, or even sage or rosemary, although rosemary gets pretty big, you almost want a big container for that if you're going to keep it over years. Because actually rosemary, if you put it in a pot and you bring it in over the winter, the second year is really when it matures the most. Because when rosemary really grows well, which here it's a little harder in our climate, after 2 years, it's kind of full grown. It can get 3-4 feet high just by itself. So maybe a rosemary you'd probably want in a separate pot, but you could do sage. Thyme doesn't take much room. Parsley, I'd keep in the middle in a deep pot. The basil, you can go all around, because as you saw, we got a medium-sized pot. We got 3 basil in there, and they're doing really great. Trying to think of the other ones. Things like dill and cilantro, though, they're different in that you grow them, and they grow, and they're done. They're not like the other ones where you cut off the leaves. I mean, you have dill, and you have where it's starting to make seeds, and then you use it, or you let the seeds grow and mature and use it. And cilantro, the same thing. You really want the leaves. When it starts making the seeds, then you're going to have coriander. But it's kind of a one-time thing. They don't go to frost. They just go, their life cycle, they're probably done by end of June, maybe the beginning of July. So those 2 herbs are different than the other ones. But as far as pot ones, the other ones are pretty good. Chives, they're very invasive. You can't kill them. We have them everywhere here. We started with a pot, and it's grown to 10 by 10. And garlic chives too. Well, they're not quite as invasive. They're both really good. But once you plant them, you won't have to plant them again. They're just that kind of an herb.
We were commenting, Joe and I, also that cilantro a lot of times will go to seed. So once you get that flower on the top of them, it just really turns them bitter, and you really have to start again. And that kind of goes for a lot of the different types of herbs when they flower.
Like the mint and the basil. You don't want either one of those to start flowering too much. When you see flowers, pick them off. Because if you don't, it'll get bitter and the plant stops growing. Mint takes a long time to do that, but basil, it's like just when you're getting the big leaves, all of a sudden they're shooting. 2 days later, you come back, here's these white flowers or whatever color, and they're going to seed, and you don't want that, because then it won't keep growing. So you have to keep picking them off. That's kind of like the pests. You got to keep up with the flowers, otherwise the plant won't be as good. Next question.
The next one, can you direct sow some herbs right into the garden?
Some, yes. Trying to think of which ones. You probably could do parsley, but it's going to take a long time. And the problem with doing direct in the garden is these herbs that take 3-4 weeks to germinate. While in your garden, you know, weeds grow too. And it's like, is that what I planted or is that a weed? Because weeds, they grow really fast every time. I mean, you can't keep up with how fast the weeds grow. I mean, that's just the nature of weeds. That's why they've survived for hundreds and thousands of years. I don't know. There isn't too many I'd really direct sow.
Probably dill.
Yeah, dill would be dill would be okay. Maybe oregano. Probably cilantro too.
Mhm.
I've seen that, and I've seen dill and cilantro come back, even though they're supposed to be an annual. If they're in a protected enough place, they'll come back again. So, anything to add?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, next question.
I think you've hit all the questions,
Okay,
which is perfect because it's right around noon here. So I guess just thank you both very much for being here and sharing your knowledge with us. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
yeah.
And thanks for everyone for tuning in and learning about gardening this morning.
And like I said, there'll be 15 plants at the Stillwater Library this afternoon. So first come, first serve. Anybody that wants some, come and get them.
If we have any more questions, do we just contact U of M like you mentioned?
Probably
That'd probably be the best way to do it.
Washington County Master. Well,
Do we
yeah,
have any? I don't know if we have any chat line.
I'm not sure if we do. Yeah, I guess start with the U of M and they can direct it to us. That would work.
Okay, thanks.
Can you post the slide that had the websites on it again?
The one that I had mentioned was it's umn.edu.
Yeah.
And then you can get to all the different drop downs in regards to plants, what type of plant, or if you do have a question for a master gardener, you can type that in there and they'll get back to you within like 24 to 48 hours.
Mhm. Can you find the one that had the slideshow information?
Yes, I can share that with you. I'll send an email after the presentation and it'll have all the links in there.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Enjoy your Saturday.
Bye.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.